Hi and welcome back to the channel. Now Minis haven't always been solely built in the UK. They've been produced all over the world and Australia was no exception. Right back in 1961, Australia became a very early export market for the Mini. But very soon, BMC's Down Under operation began building their own cars using 80% of locally sourced materials. These Minis often had very unique design traits, such as winding windows long before the UK market received them, and other stylings, unique colours, unique interiors, and so on. Nearly 180,000 Minis were produced down under, and in this episode of Viewers Drives, we're going to look at one of these. So please welcome Paul Burns's 1968 Mark I Cooper S. The Australian Mark I Cooper S was produced between 1965 and 1969, with around 5,000 examples leaving their Zetland plant near Sydney. So Paul's 1968 example is therefore a very late Mark I. So like their UK cousins, the Australian Mark I's had a very similar frontal treatment, with that small grille with the moustache surrounding it and the hockey stick ends, right down to the Mark I badging as well. And most part, Australian Minis were Morris badged, so therefore the Morris Cooper S badging. Again, very similar. Around the rear of the car, the similarities to the UK cars, again, is very recognisable, with those small tail lights, the small rear window, and right down to the number plate recess with a flap, albeit a reduced version of that to suit the Australian licence plates. So the Mark I was available in both two-tone and single-tone, and a lot of these colours were unique to the Australian market. As in Paul's case here, we have the burgundy roof over white, which again was not an option in the UK. Also, the original colour of the car is actually embossed on the ID plate located under the bonnet. So as we mentioned earlier, the Australian Minis came with a lot of very unique traits, and the door is just one of these. As you can see, the external door hinges, again, very familiar to all UK Minis of the same era. Right down to the lever door handle, again, very familiar. Now the windows are very different. As you can see, the Australian Minis had winding windows long before the UK market had, but they also had these little pop-out quarter lights, which we never received in the UK market. And these doors were fitted to all Australian Cooper S's. The factory-fitted wheels were the same 10-inch steel with the 9 ventilation holes around the inner hub, albeit in 4.5 inches wide, which was the option wheel in the UK. The wheels were painted in silver birch instead of Old English white that we'd be more used to in the Mark I. And the majority of Mark I cars were not actually fitted with the wheel arch flares as standard. However, this is a common aftermarket modification, and it's generally accepted that the Mark I could be fitted with flares from the dealer. And frankly, this is believed to be more commonly occurred in the South Australia and Victorian states. Okay, so let's take a look under the bonnet. Usual for opening a Mark I Mini bonnet is externally popped, and then the usual stay. So this is revealing the 1275 unit for this Cooper S. Now, because of the low number of 970 and 1071 S's, which were produced solely for homologation reasons for rallying, they never were domestically made in Australia. Any 1071s or 970 S's in Australia would have been private imports, or very, very few would have been produced in Australia itself. So for the majority of Cooper S's, 1275 unit was the engine of choice. Now these engines were built in the UK and they were shipped to Australia to be fitted to all Australian Minis. On the assembly line, these would have been painted in bronze green, which we all would be used to, but repainted once they arrived in Australia in the Cooper S metallic green. The unit itself, very, very similar to the UK market cars, with a 9.75 to 1 compression ratio. It produced around 70 brake horsepower at 5,000 revs and around 80 pounds-foot of torque at 3,000 revs. So the performance, again, very, very similar, if not the same, as the UK market cars. Australian engine numbers were stamped into the block as opposed to on a little plate. And I'll just read it here. They all began with a 9F SA Y prefix with 6 numbers to generate the number of the engine. So just while we're under the bonnet, a couple of other things which are very unique to the Australian Minis. The chassis plate is located up on the bulkhead, just behind the master cylinders, and has a lot more information on which the UK cars would have had. On this, it gives the car type, gives the car number, it also gives the engine number, which in this case matches with the car, all matching number car here, and it also gives the colour of the car. So as we can read here, it says it is burgundy red, which is over snow white. In addition to that, the body number of the car is actually pressed into the radiator shroud. In the UK, the chassis plate was much more simple, with very little more information on it, and this was simply just pot riveted onto the radiator shroud. So the gearbox which was attached to this engine was the 22G33 casing, and that identified it as a 4-speed 3-synchro, which is a Type B remote gear change. And again, other things which are lovely to see in this car. This is a matching number car. Everything is age dated and everything matches right down to the cover of the wiper motor. It is exactly the right date for this car. This car is 100% original, which is fantastic to see. So we've come around the back of the Mini here, and as you can see, the rear treatment of the Mark I Australian Minis, again, is very similar to the UK cousins. We have the smaller back window, as I mentioned. We have the smaller taillights. Again, the bumper treatment, again, very similar as it is at the front. We have the overriders with the little corner bars. Again, all very familiar. We also have this number plate flap. Again, all very familiar. But as you can see, this is much smaller on the Australian cars. And the reason for that is quite simple. So the Australian number plates are a lot smaller than the UK versions. So again, as we open the boot lid, the number plate flap drops down as it would on the UK cars. Just while we have the boot open, as you can see, that reveals the twin tanks, again, which are standard fit on all Australian Cooper S's, and reveals the boot board. Now the boot board does differ a little bit from the UK market cars. In the UK, the boot boards would have been carpeted, but that has its own issues with putting things in and out of the boot that they do wear. The Australian cars, for the most part, have them in vinyl, which again is much more hard wearing. The colour, like the UK car, does match the interior of the car and sits on, if I just pull this out, slides out to reveal, access to the battery and to the spare wheel as it would have in the UK cars. In addition to that, we see all the bracketry which holds the boot floor again, and this little stopper which I don't believe we had in the UK cars, which stops it from rattling about. And again, the weight of this, again, much higher quality than the UK market cars. I just slide it back in and lock it into place. So just while we're on the exterior of the car, there's a little detail I only just noticed this morning, that the scuttle panel actually has this little recess where the wiper arm is attached to the car. So even that pressing is different from the UK cars. And just again, just when we're here, you can see even the glass is Australian stamped. So another unique trait of the Australian Minis is the combined indicator and side light arrangement, as you can see here, with the side lights on the indicator. The right indicator here is actually flashing. So in the UK, obviously, these indicators would have been standalone with the side lights located in the headlamp unit. Okay, so let's open these very unique doors. So the first thing we see as soon as we open these doors, we have a very different interior to the UK market cars. The door bin is there, as we would be used to. However, it is greatly reduced, and obviously the reason for that is that the interior of the door is taken up with the winding mechanism and with the door lock arrangement there as well. So we have the integrated door lock as opposed to a screwed on version or bolted on version in the UK cars. We have what we would be more used to in the later Mark III cars with the internal door hinges. We have the door opener, and again, obviously we have our little winding window arrangement here as well as these very naughty little pop-out windows here as well. Now the interior trim was also very unique to the Australian market, and the Mark I Cooper S had two different patterns for the seats. From 1965 until 1967, they had very evenly spaced pleats with a very thick squab here at the very front of the seat. But then from 1967 until 1969, as this car would have, it has a wider pleats on the outer edges, and the pleats run right over the front edge of the seat, as opposed to up to a front squab. The trim was very plain, as you can see here, unlike the dual tone interiors of the UK Coopers, and the carpets were actually a flecked in a sisal type loop, as you can see here, with an integrated heel pad, which again varied in design throughout the years. Now the rest of the interior is very familiar as a Cooper S. We have the big steering wheel as usual. We have our 120 mph speedo again here. Everything else here all very, very similar, right down to the chromed gear shifter as well. Now Australian Minis did get some safety features which we never received in the UK market until much later. The windscreen is laminated as opposed to toughened on a Mini of this age in the UK market. It came standard with 3-point seat belts, and as well, have you noticed the little lock arrangement here on the passenger side, or the little lift up locker, which we were more used to on a more modern car, and we never received anything like that in the UK market cars. And just a little bit of history behind the Australian car here, just how Paul come to have it. So, like I said, this is a 1968 car from the Zeppelin plant in Sydney in Australia. At some point in its life, the car was imported to America. It retained its right-hand drive configuration. It was never converted to left-hand drive. And yeah, so it resided in the US for quite some time until Paul bought the car, and he imported it from Michigan in 2020. So, yeah, the car has been well travelled. It's been all around the world, but yeah, it's great to see this car in Ireland as well. So, a very, very rare car, and yeah, one which I'm sure Paul is very proud of. Now, I want to take this opportunity to really thank Paul for letting us have a walk around of his Australian Cooper S. Australian Minis are very, very rare in the UK, and there can't be any more than a handful here on the island of Ireland. And it's a real privilege to be able to have a walk around and really to take in everything that this car has to offer. I've always found the unique characteristics of the Australian Minis really, really interesting, and I've always wondered why the UK market never received a lot of them. And again, these are things which are going to remain a mystery for all time. But yeah, all that's left to say is thanks again for joining us on this video. We really look forward to seeing you in the next video when we'll be looking at a very special Mini limited edition. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.